I don't think I'll ever hike alone again. Not because of ghosts or wild animals or anything like that. What happened to me was something way more grounded and real, and that's what made it even more terrifying. I had planned the trip about 2 months in advance. I work from home, sitting at a desk most days, and after a long stretch of deadlines and screen time, I needed a break from people, traffic, and the sound of phones ringing. Hiking has always been my escape. I like the idea of carrying everything I need on my back, walking into the woods, and being completely cut off from everything. This time, I chose a trail I'd never done before, Dead Signal Ridge Trail. It's not that popular, which is what made it so appealing. I had read a blog post from someone who said it was underused, very quiet, and the views were amazing if you made it to the top ridge. It was about 14 miles one way, with a back route that looped you down along a dried creek. All in all, it was a solid 2-day trip. Camp halfway, finish the loop the next day. Simple, or so I thought. The first morning I drove out early. It was about a 3-hour drive from where I lived. The roads got narrower the closer I got, and my signal dropped completely once I passed a little gas station about 30 minutes from the trailhead. That didn't bother me. Dead Signal Ridge didn't get its name from phones. It was named after a mining post from the early 1900s that used a smoke signal system which failed during a blizzard. The name stuck even after the mine shut down. When I reached the trailhead, there were only 2 other cars parked. That was a good sign to me. I parked, locked up, double-checked my gear. Tent, food, water filter, extra clothes, small medical kit, GPS unit, a map, and a compass. I carried my phone mostly for the camera and just in case I got signal in high spots. I also had a fixed-blade knife strapped to my belt, something I always carried. Not because I expected trouble, but because it's just a good habit on long hikes. The first few hours were peaceful. The forest was dense with old pine and cedar, and every now and then the trees would break and give me a view of the rolling hills and ridges beyond. I kept a good pace, stopping only once around noon to eat a peanut butter sandwich I'd packed. I didn't see another person the whole time, just a few squirrels and one deer that bolted as soon as I came around a bend. By late afternoon, I had covered about 8 miles. That was more than enough for the first day. I found a clearing near a small stream that looked like it might still flow if it rained, though it was dry now. I pitched my tent, filtered some water from a tiny trickle that still ran near the rocks, and started boiling it for dinner. As I sat and ate my dehydrated meal, the sky started to go pink with sunset. There was no sound but the soft breeze and some distant birds. It was perfect. That night, I climbed into my sleeping bag, read a few pages of a paperback, and fell asleep with no trouble. It was around 2 or 3 a.m. when I woke up needing to pee. It was cold, and everything was quiet outside the tent. I unzipped the door as quietly as I could and stepped out with my headlamp. I didn't go far, just behind a tree about 20 feet away. When I came back and crawled inside again, I noticed something weird. My boots were wet, not just damp, but like someone had dunked them in the stream. That didn't make sense because I had taken them off before going into the tent and left them just inside the flap. I reached out and touched the outside of the tent. Bone dry. I checked the top flap, also dry. No rain, no condensation, nothing that would explain it. I shook it off. Maybe I spilled some of the water from my bottle earlier. Maybe I just didn't remember. My brain was foggy, and I was too cold and tired to think straight. I left the boots by the edge of the tent again and went back to sleep. The next morning, everything looked normal. No signs of rain, no tracks, no weird smells or broken branches. Just forest. I put on dry socks and my damp boots, packed everything, and headed out. The trail got steeper from there. I climbed up through rocky switchbacks, the kind that burn your thighs after just 10 minutes. Around every turn I hoped to see the ridge, but it just kept going. I stopped often to rest, drink water, and check my bearings. I kept seeing animal tracks. Mostly deer, maybe some raccoon, but nothing alarming. Around noon, I finally reached the ridge, and it was worth it. From the top, I could see for miles, rolling tree-covered hills, the glitter of a lake in the far distance, and the faint gray of a road I'd driven up on. I took some photos, ate lunch, and lay on my pack for a while, just staring up at the clouds. Then I checked my GPS, something didn't add up. According to my map and the GPS unit, the loop should have curved west from here, dropping down into the creek trail. But the trail on the ground kept going north. It was faint too, less worn, like nobody used it. I walked a little ahead to see if maybe the trail curved back, but it didn't. It just kept going north into thicker trees. I pulled out my map again and studied it carefully. The loop definitely turned west here. I walked back to the ridge and looked around. There was no sign, no markers, not even cairns. I scanned the forest with my eyes, and then I noticed something. A set of old wooden posts buried in the brush off to the left. I pushed through and found what looked like a barely used trail, almost hidden by overgrowth. It looked like nobody had used it in a long time. Still, it lined up with the map, so I followed it. That's where things started to feel off. The trail dropped down fast, and the trees got denser. The air got cooler and still. I didn't see any animals anymore, not even birds. The deeper I went, the more the trail seemed to disappear under layers of leaves and fallen branches. I started marking trees with strips of tape just to be safe. At one point, I found what looked like a coyote skull, perfectly clean, lying right in the middle of the trail. That put me on edge. Coyotes don't just die in the open like that. Still, I kept going. I told myself I was just tired, reading too much into it. I hiked for another 3 hours without seeing anything familiar from the map. My GPS was acting up too. It would freeze, then jump, then go blank for a few seconds before catching up. Eventually, it started telling me I was off route, even though I had been following the trail exactly. Around 4 p.m., I stopped and tried to get a signal with my phone. Nothing. I turned around and decided to head back to the ridge. But after walking for maybe an hour uphill, I didn't recognize anything. No tape markers, no old posts. The trail had just disappeared. I stopped walking and stood still for a few minutes, just listening. There was nothing, not even wind, just a deep, eerie silence. I didn't panic, not yet. I had daylight, gear, food, and water. I could retrace my steps. But no matter which way I walked, nothing looked familiar. It was like the forest had swallowed the trail completely. I camped that night in a small dip between hills. I didn't sleep well. Every crack of a branch made my eyes snap open. I kept thinking I heard footsteps, but when I sat up and listened, it would go quiet again. It felt like something was near me, watching, but never getting close enough for me to see. The next day, I got up early and climbed to the top of the nearest hill, hoping to see the ridge or any landmark. I saw trees, just trees in every direction. My GPS was useless again, blank screen. I had a compass, so I decided to head directly west, figuring I'd eventually hit the creek or even a service road marked on the edge of the paper map. By noon, I was scratched up, bleeding from thorns and branches, and low on water. I kept pushing. Around 3 p.m., I stumbled onto something unexpected, an old hunting shack. It was falling apart, roof partially caved in, but the door was still on its hinges. I approached it slowly, knocking on the wood even though I knew nobody was there. Inside, it was dark and smelled of mold. There was an old wooden chair, a rusted stove, and some shredded sleeping bags in the corner. Animal droppings everywhere. I decided not to sleep there, but I took shelter under the outer porch for the shade and boiled some water. That night, I slept outside nearby, using the shack as cover. Again, I kept hearing things, branches snapping, a low rustling. I stayed awake most of the night, clutching my knife. The next day, I found a rough trail leading away from the shack. I followed it for hours. Eventually, it led to an old dirt road. I nearly cried when I saw tire tracks. I followed that road until I found a locked gate, then crawled under it and hiked another hour until I reached a highway. A farmer in a pickup stopped when he saw me. I must have looked like hell, dirty, scratched up, wild-eyed. He gave me water, let me use his phone to call for help. I learned I had come out nearly 20 miles north of the trailhead. I had been walking in giant circles. I got back to my car the next morning, after being dropped off by a ranger. The car was still there, untouched. I went home. I didn't tell anyone the full story, not because I was embarrassed, but because it was hard to explain what it felt like out there. It was late October when I decided to go on a solo hiking trip deep into the Appalachian Mountains. I had been planning this for months, meticulously checking the trail maps, stocking my gear, and training my legs on smaller hikes. I wanted something quiet, remote, and tough. I wanted to clear my head, and I figured a long hike with no distractions would do the trick. The plan was to follow a rarely used section of trail that split off from a more popular route. It would loop around the side of a large ridge and dip into a narrow valley before circling back. According to the map, the whole thing would take 4 days if I moved at a steady pace. It wasn't a marked trail, but it had been used by some locals and backcountry hikers, and I had read a few old posts about it online. It looked challenging, which is what drew me in. I parked my truck at a ranger station and started early in the morning. The first day was easy. The air was cool. The leaves had turned red and orange, and the trail felt alive with rustling animals and chirping birds. I hiked about 12 miles that day before finding a flat clearing near a creek where I set up camp. Everything felt right. I cooked, ate, and slept soundly. The second day was when things started to shift. The trail got narrower and the forest became denser. There were long stretches where I couldn't see the sky, and the trees looked like they were closing in from both sides. I followed the GPS, but I noticed the path didn't quite match what I'd seen on the map. I double-checked everything, but the terrain looked the same, so I kept going. There was no signal out here, which I expected. That was part of the appeal, after all. By mid-afternoon, I found an old logging road and decided to follow it for a while to save time. It wasn't on my map, but it headed in the right direction. The road was muddy, and my boots kept slipping. There were tracks in the mud, some from deer or maybe elk, but others were harder to explain. They looked human, but wider, barefoot, and deep, like someone very heavy had passed through recently. I chalked it up to maybe a hunter or someone else hiking off-trail. It made me feel uneasy, but I tried not to overthink it. I pressed on until dusk and then found a small rise above the valley where I pitched my tent. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I heard soft crunching sounds in the woods. I turned off my headlamp and listened in the dark. It stopped. I figured it was just a deer. The third morning was foggy. I packed up early, hoping to cover more ground. The trail was harder to follow. It dipped down into the valley, and the ground became swampy in places. I slipped a few times and my gear got wet. Around midday, I realized I hadn't seen any signs of the trail in hours. No blazes on the trees, no footprints, nothing. The GPS still showed I was moving in the right direction, but everything around me looked unfamiliar. I climbed up a steep slope to get a better view, hoping I could see the ridge and reorient myself. From the top, I saw dense forest in every direction. No trails, no openings, just thick woods. That's when I started to feel the real weight of isolation. I wasn't just alone. I was off trail and I wasn't even sure how far. Still, I kept moving. I figured if I kept heading north, I would eventually hit the loop or a creek I recognized. The day dragged on. I was moving slower now, and my legs were tired. The air felt colder, and I had to stop more often to rest. That afternoon, I found something strange. It was a pile of rocks, stacked deliberately in a cone shape, like a cairn, but not one you'd see on a normal trail. It was too tall, maybe 4 feet high, and not placed on any path. Just sitting in the middle of the woods. It looked fresh. The rocks weren't covered in moss or leaves. A few feet from it, I saw a rope tied to a tree. It was frayed at the ends and hung loosely like someone had cut it. My stomach turned. I didn't want to think about what it might have been used for. I moved quickly after that, ignoring how heavy my pack felt. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept hearing things. Cracks, rustling, branches snapping. Once, something brushed against my tent. I held my breath and grabbed my knife. After a few minutes, it was quiet again, but I couldn't relax. I stayed up until daylight. On the 4th day, I knew I had to turn around. I wasn't making progress, and I was starting to run low on food and water. My legs ached, and my shoulders were sore. I retraced my steps as best I could, but it was hard. The forest all looked the same. I followed the GPS south, hoping to find the logging road again. Around noon, I stepped into a clearing and saw something that made my heart drop. It was my own boot print. I recognized the tread and the deep cut on the heel. I looked around and saw more. I had walked in a giant loop without realizing it. I stood there in the cold, trying to figure out how I could have gotten so turned around. The sun was starting to dip low, and I didn't want to spend another night out there. I pushed hard, moving fast downhill toward where I thought the creek was. I stumbled, twisted my ankle, and fell hard onto my side. I lay there for a minute, breathing heavy, pain shooting through my leg. I sat up and felt the swelling. I could walk, but not well. I hobbled on, gritting my teeth. It was almost dark when I saw the cabin. It wasn't on the map. It looked abandoned, small, made of rotting wood with a rusted metal roof. The door was off its hinges, leaning against the frame. I hesitated but decided it was better than spending another night in the open. Inside, it was cold and smelled like mold. The floor creaked, and the windows were broken. There was an old stove, a broken chair, and a pile of dirty blankets in the corner. I didn't care. I shut the door as best I could and used my pack as a pillow. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag and tried to stay warm. I slept in short bursts, waking up at every sound. Just before sunrise, I heard what sounded like footsteps outside, slow, steady crunches in the leaves. I stayed still, heart pounding. They passed by, and I waited another hour before leaving. With the ankle pain and lack of food, I was weak, but I moved. I followed the slope of the land, sticking near the creek. Around midday, I found the old logging road again. Relief washed over me like a wave. I followed it, limping slowly, until I saw a trail marker I recognized. From there, I pushed hard until I finally made it back to the main trail. When I reached my truck, I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before I could even put the key in the ignition. My face was dirty, my clothes were torn, and I was shaking. I didn't tell anyone what really happened out there. I said I got turned around and camped longer than I meant to. That was it. But I think about that loop I walked, the strange pile of rocks, the rope, the cabin with old blankets, and the heavy barefoot prints. Someone else had been out there, maybe still is. I won't be going back. Not alone. Not ever again. It was the last week of October when I decided to take some time off and go on a solo hiking trip. I'd been feeling burned out for a while and needed to disconnect from everything. I chose a trail deep in the northern part of Oregon, near the edge of a national forest. It wasn't a popular route, which was exactly what I wanted. Just trees, cold air, and silence. I packed everything I'd need for 4 days: tent, sleeping bag, enough food, water purification tablets, a good knife, a first aid kit, a flare gun, and layers of clothing. I'd gone on several hikes before, but this was my first time going deep into a place where cell signal didn't exist. The first day went as planned. The trail started easy, then got tougher as I moved deeper into the forest. The trees were tall and dense, the air smelled of pine and wet soil, and the wind barely moved through the thick trunks. I made it about 8 miles in before I found a flat spot near a small stream. I set up camp, ate some dried beef and trail mix, and lay in my tent listening to the sound of water and leaves rustling. The second day, I hiked farther in. I followed the map closely and stayed on the trail, but the deeper I went, the less clear the trail became. Fallen branches, overgrown shrubs, and muddy patches started covering parts of it. I marked trees with small strips of bright orange tape, just in case I needed to backtrack. Around noon, I passed a set of old boot prints going the opposite direction. They looked at least a few days old, maybe more. It was the only sign I'd seen of another person. That night, I made camp on a slope. It wasn't ideal, but it was the flattest spot I could find. The cold settled hard after the sun dropped. I wrapped myself in 2 layers and crawled into my sleeping bag. Just as I started drifting off, I heard a thump in the woods, maybe 50 feet away. It wasn't an animal sound. It was heavy, like someone dropping something big. I stayed still, heart pounding. After about a minute of silence, I heard nothing more. It was probably just a branch falling. On the third day, things started getting weird. I woke up to find one of my orange trail markers tied around a rock near my tent. I hadn't put it there. I was sure of it. My tape roll was still in my bag. At first, I thought maybe it had fallen off a tree and blown over, but it was neatly tied. Someone had done it. I didn't see or hear anyone, but I picked up the pace that day. I stuck strictly to my planned route, but even so, things kept feeling off. Trees I was sure I'd marked had no tape. The boot prints I saw before appeared again ahead of me, going the same way I was. How? That night, I set up camp near a large moss-covered boulder. I stayed awake longer than usual, scanning the woods with my flashlight every few minutes. Around 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like footsteps, slow, crunching on dry leaves, then stopping. I turned off my light and held my breath. 10 minutes went by, then 20. Nothing. When I finally slept, I dreamed of getting lost. The fourth day was supposed to be my last before turning around. But the map stopped matching what I saw. A fork in the trail that should have gone left now curved sharply right. I checked my compass. It didn't make sense. I tried to follow what the map said, but I kept ending up in the same area. A grove of twisted, blackened trees. It was like I was going in circles. Around noon, I found something that made my stomach drop. A torn backpack covered in mud, wedged under a pile of fallen branches. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were old energy bars, a crushed water bottle, and a journal. The last entry in the journal was dated 6 months ago. Talked about someone trying to find their way out, but everything looking the same. Then it ended.
No signature.
Just pages of scribbles and broken sentences. I shoved the journal into my bag and kept moving. I didn't want to camp again. I wanted to get back. I followed what I thought was north for hours, but I didn't reach any familiar spot. Around sunset, I found another trail marker, this time one of mine, tied to a different tree. I hadn't put it there. I walked faster, almost running, until I had to stop. My legs were shaking. I set up my tent under a thick canopy and stayed inside the entire night, listening. I didn't sleep. Every few hours I'd hear snapping branches, but nothing ever came close. First light, I started again. I didn't even eat. I just drank water, packed up, and moved. I followed the stream that ran near my first camp, hoping it would lead me back. I walked beside it all morning. Around noon, I saw something ahead, a clearing. And in the clearing was a pile of rocks. A tall pile, about 5 feet high. On top of it was another trail marker of mine, tied around a stick. This wasn't something I made. Someone else had. Felt like a message, or a warning. I didn't touch it. I moved past it fast, staying close to the stream. By late afternoon, I started recognizing things. Fallen logs, the shape of a ridge, the way the stream curved. I was close. Finally, I found the first campsite I made. My old fire pit was there. I almost cried. I didn't stop. I kept going another 8 miles without resting. My legs were cramping, my feet numb, and I had no more food. When I saw the gravel road where I'd left my car, I dropped to my knees. I got in the car and drove without stopping until I reached the nearest town. I went straight to a diner and sat there for an hour before I could even eat. Then I went to the local ranger station. I told them everything about the backpack, the journal, the trail markers moving. They sent out a team the next day, but they didn't find anything. Not the journal, not the pile of rocks, not the torn bag. They said the forest can mess with your sense of direction. They said I was lucky I made it out. But I know what I saw. Someone else was out there. Someone who didn't want me there. I haven't gone hiking since. I still have the journal. Kept it. Every now and then, I take it out and read the last page. I try to convince myself that I imagined it all. But deep down, I know I didn't, and I'll never go back. I had done a lot of solo hikes before. Most of them were weekend trips, long trails near the mountains, forest routes, or dry hill tracks across different states. Nothing extreme. I liked the quiet, the focus it gave me, and the break from screens and people. I wasn't a survivalist or anything like that. I just liked hiking, I packed well, trained enough, and usually stuck to trails that had moderate foot traffic. I wasn't interested in being a daredevil, just in being outside. This time, I chose a loop trail in a lesser-known part of Utah. I'm not going to name it here, but it was about 5 hours from the city, mostly dirt road driving once I left the highway. I had found it online. The loop was roughly 28 miles total, shaped like a distorted figure eight that looped around 2 ridges, with an option to cut through a narrow pass between them to shorten the trip. From what I had read, it was rarely crowded, but still had the occasional camper or trail runner. The elevation was around 7,000 feet, not too high, and there were a couple of freshwater streams marked on the map. Seemed like a perfect weekend. I left on a Friday, early morning, and reached the trailhead parking lot before noon. There were only 2 other cars parked, both dusty, both looking like they'd been there for a while. Good, quiet, but not completely deserted. That was what I wanted. I signed in on the trail register, took a photo of the large wooden map posted at the start, strapped on my pack, and started walking. The air was dry, and the trail was well marked at first. Soft dirt underfoot, low shrubs on either side, and scattered pine trees. The first few miles were easy. I had packed light. Tent, food for 3 days, a filter bottle, GPS, topo map, compass, bear spray, emergency bivvy, and my old hiking boots that had never let me down. I kept a slow and steady pace, stopping only to refill my bottle at a creek about 6 miles in. Everything felt fine, peaceful. I camped just past the halfway point of the first loop, right by a stream that came out of a narrow cut in the ridge. I pitched my tent near some rocks and took a short walk around the area before sunset. There was no one else around. I saw boot prints on the dirt, but they looked old, maybe from earlier that week. Still, I didn't feel uneasy. If anything, it was the kind of solitude I liked. No traffic noise, no texts, just the breeze and the creaking trees. That night was calm, a little cold, but I slept fine. The next morning, I packed up early and decided to take the narrow pass that cut across to the other side of the loop. I figured I could save some time, maybe make it back to the car by late evening instead of the following morning. That pass wasn't marked clearly on the trailhead map, but I had it on my printed topo and GPS. It looked like a narrow saddle between 2 high ridges, sloping down into a dry creek bed, then joining the trail again about 5 miles farther. I reached the pass by mid-morning. The trail got thinner, rockier. At some points, it wasn't even a trail anymore, just a faint line of flattened grass and scuffed stones. Still, my GPS confirmed I was on track. I kept going. As I crossed the saddle, I noticed the wind had picked up. The trees here were shorter, stunted, bent in odd directions from constant weather. I kept my hood up and pushed through. The path started dipping downward, and the terrain changed. Turned more rugged, more broken. The rocks were sharper. The dirt was loose. I started losing the trail. That was when I made my first real mistake. Instead of turning back or double-checking carefully, I pushed forward. I figured it would connect back eventually, and my GPS still pointed me in the general direction I needed. But that's the thing about GPS, it shows you a direction, not the real shape of the land between. I followed what looked like a dry wash. It led me lower and lower into a gulch with steep rock walls on either side. I thought it would level out soon, that I'd meet the trail again just past the ridge. But after an hour, I realized I was boxed in. The sides were too steep to climb. The wash ended at a tangle of dead trees and loose rock. The GPS said I was only a quarter mile from the trail, but I couldn't climb back out, not with my full pack and the time I had left. I sat down and checked the map again. My mistake was clear. I had followed the wrong depression. The pass I needed was higher, wider, and had a real trail. I'd gone into the wrong cut entirely. I backtracked, climbing slowly, but the terrain was worse going up. I kept slipping. Every few feet I had to stop and rest. The sun was higher now, the air hotter. I drank more water. I didn't want to admit it, but I was in a bad spot. I made it out of the wash after maybe 2 hours. My legs were scraped. My arms were tired. My shoulders hurt from the shifting pack weight. I climbed onto a flat section and tried to find the correct path again. But from up here, everything looked the same. Barren hills, twisted brush, and rock. No sign of the trail. I pulled out my GPS again, and it showed the trail maybe 600 yards northeast. That wasn't far, but 600 yards of uneven terrain could take a long time. I headed that way, careful this time, scanning for signs.
No markers. No footprints.
I kept moving. Then I saw something up ahead. At first, I thought it was a large animal. It looked like fur or a body shape curled near a fallen tree. I froze. My mind jumped to bear, but the shape wasn't right. As I got closer, I saw it was a backpack, just lying there beside a rock, torn, covered in dust. Sun faded. I hesitated but walked up slowly. The pack was old, zippers busted, the fabric dry and cracked. There were still items inside, empty food wrappers, part of a tarp, a cracked bottle. No sign of who it belonged to, just abandoned, left there to rot in the sun. Something about it made my chest tighten. It hadn't been touched in months, maybe years. No one comes out this far unless they're lost. I stood there for a long time, looking at it. I thought about the 2 cars at the trailhead. One of them could have been sitting there a long time. I moved on. For the next few hours, I kept heading toward the trail, checking GPS every 10 minutes. I was low on water now. I had 1 filter bottle and a backup bladder, but I hadn't seen a stream since yesterday morning. The heat was kicking in hard. My shirt was soaked. My feet hurt, but I kept going. I had to. By late afternoon, I reached the trail again, or something close to it. It was more of a faint line now, less traveled, less clear, but it matched the map. I followed it. My legs were shaking. I ate an energy bar without stopping. I hadn't even realized how hungry I was until then. I told myself I'd find a place to camp before sunset. Maybe even make it to the final stretch near the parking lot if I pushed. But around mile 20, things got worse. I started hearing something like stone shifting behind me. At first I thought it was wind, then maybe an animal, but I kept hearing it. Crunch, slide, stop. I turned around several times. Nothing. The ridge walls around me echoed, which made it harder to tell where the sound came from. I picked up my pace, kept going. The sound wasn't constant, just now and then, a crunch, a scrape. I kept moving faster. I was already sore, but I forced my legs to push. I didn't stop until I reached a wide turn in the trail and saw something that froze me. Fresh boot prints. Not mine. Deep, clear, heading the same direction I was. I hadn't seen a single person in 2 days. These weren't old. The edges were sharp. Whoever made them passed this way maybe an hour before. I stopped. My throat was dry. I scanned the ridges, the trees. Nothing. I didn't like how I felt. I didn't want to follow those prints, but I had no other choice. The trail was here, the route to safety. I kept going. I didn't see anyone, just those prints now and then, especially in the soft dirt between rocks. Then I noticed something else. The prints started veering off trail again, heading toward a ridge slope where the trees thickened. I followed the trail instead. I wasn't going after someone. I just wanted out. As the sun dipped lower, I found a flat area behind some large rocks and set up my tent. I was dead tired. I cooked the last of my food and drank the rest of my clean water. I still had my filter, but I needed to find a stream soon. That night was different. The wind had stopped, but the air felt heavy. I lay inside the tent, sweating. I heard something, maybe steps on gravel, a stick snapping, then silence. I didn't move. I lay still, eyes open. My hand rested on my bear spray can. Nothing happened. I must have stayed awake for 2 hours, listening. Then I passed out from exhaustion. In the morning, the sky was overcast. The air was cooler, and I felt stiff, but ready to move. I packed fast and hit the trail early. I passed the last stream before the parking area and filled my bottles. I didn't stop long. I wanted to be done. My legs were numb by now. My feet had blisters. My hands were scraped. I just wanted to reach my car. When I did, it was supposed to be a quiet weekend. Just me, the trail, and some fresh air. I had taken a few days off from work, tired of the screens, the meetings, and the constant noise of the city. I wanted to be somewhere no one could reach me, somewhere off the grid. So I picked a trail in northern Idaho, a less traveled route through a long stretch of forest, away from campsites and cabins, just the kind of remote place I needed. The plan was to hike in about 15 miles to a small alpine lake I had read about in an old blog post. The guy who wrote it said he didn't see another soul the whole weekend. That's exactly what I wanted. I packed light but made sure to bring enough food for 3 nights, a compact tent, a sleeping bag rated for cold nights, a map, compass, extra clothes, a first aid kit, a headlamp, batteries, and my water filter. I didn't bring a GPS. I liked using paper maps and I trusted myself with them. The first few miles were fine. The trail was narrow but visible. It cut through pine forests, climbed steadily for a while, then dipped into a wide valley full of thick ferns and tall grass. It was quiet except for the sounds of birds and insects. I liked that. I took short breaks every couple miles, drank some water, ate some trail mix, adjusted the straps of my backpack. After about 8 miles, I stopped near a stream to refill my bottles. I sat on a rock for a while, just watching the water move around stones and fallen branches. The breeze was cool. I hadn't seen anyone since I parked my car. No tire tracks near the trailhead either. That was a good sign. Felt like I had the whole forest to myself. By late afternoon, I started to feel the weight of the pack more. My shoulders ached a bit. My legs were tired. I was still a few miles from the lake, but I pushed on, knowing it would be better to set up camp there than stop halfway. Around the 12th mile, the trail started to fade. It became hard to follow. There were no clear markers and the undergrowth was thicker. I took out my map and checked my location based on landmarks, the bend in the stream, the slope of the ridge to the east. I thought I was still on track, so I kept going. The sun was dropping fast behind the trees. I needed to find a spot soon. Then I saw it, something resembling the lake. I couldn't see the full shoreline through the trees, but the light reflecting off the water was a relief. I made my way toward it, bushwhacking through some thick branches and roots. The spot I picked to camp was on a slight rise about 20 feet from the water. There was a flat patch of mossy ground, just wide enough for my small tent. I pitched it quickly and collected some dead wood for a small fire. I didn't plan on cooking, but the warmth and light helped me relax. As I sat there, chewing on a cold meal bar and watching the sky go dark, I felt good, like I had done something right. That night, the forest got loud, more than I expected. Crickets, frogs, and other things I couldn't name. I tried to sleep but kept waking up. A few times, I thought I heard something bigger moving through the woods, maybe a deer. Once, I even reached for my flashlight and unzipped the tent to check. I didn't see anything, just trees and the still surface of the lake. By morning, I was tired but not worried. I made instant coffee, ate a few crackers, and planned a short hike around the lake. I didn't carry my pack this time, just my filter, a snack, and my map. As I circled the far side of the lake, I noticed something strange. The remains of an old fire pit, half buried in moss. Not too weird, people had obviously been here before, but it looked fresh, like someone had scraped away the moss recently. There were boot prints too, not old and eroded, but sharp-edged, like they were made in the past day or two. I froze. I hadn't seen anyone on the trail. No one had passed me. No fresh tire tracks. I didn't like the feeling it gave me, but I told myself it could have been a hunter or someone camping off-trail. Nothing to worry about. That day, I stayed closer to camp. I kept the fire going longer and double-checked my gear. I made sure my food was stored properly and I kept my knife on me. I didn't sleep well again. Just before dawn, I heard something near the tent. It wasn't an animal. I could tell. The footsteps were careful, like someone walking on dry leaves but trying not to make noise. I lay there, heart pounding, holding my breath. I didn't move. After a minute, the sound stopped. When the sun finally rose, I got out and looked around. No tracks, no signs of anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I made a decision to hike out early. I packed quickly and started back. I had been hiking less than an hour when I noticed something that didn't belong. Plastic wrapper stuck to a bush. I hadn't dropped anything, and this brand wasn't something I packed. It looked fresh. I kept moving, After a few more miles, I stopped to rest. That's when I saw it again. Another boot print. Fresh, not mine, facing the direction I had come from. Felt like someone was following me. I didn't run. I didn't want to make noise, but I didn't take long breaks either. I kept walking, head on a swivel, ears tuned to every sound. I started to notice more broken branches than before, like someone had gone through in a hurry. That night, I set up camp near a dry creek bed. I didn't light a fire. I didn't want to give away my position. I didn't even eat, just drank some water and crawled into my tent. I didn't sleep. I listened. Every tiny sound made me tense up. Just after midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow, getting closer, then silence. I held my breath. My knife was in my hand. I didn't move a muscle. Whoever it was didn't come right up to the tent, but they were close. I stayed like that until morning. As soon as there was enough light, I packed up and moved fast. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just moved downhill, keeping the sun to my right, using my compass to stay aimed toward the highway. I crossed a few animal trails, slipped on rocks, and scratched up my legs, but I didn't stop. That afternoon, I finally heard something new, the faint hum of a car. It took me a while to find the road, but when I did, I almost cried. It was another 2 miles to where I had parked my car. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole time. When I reached the car, everything was still there. No signs of tampering. I unlocked it, threw my gear in, and drove without stopping until I hit the next town. I didn't report it. I didn't even tell anyone. Felt too strange. There wasn't any proof. Just the feeling of being followed, of not being alone, of someone out there watching, walking the same trail, staying just far enough behind. I haven't been on a solo hike since. Now when I think about that trip, I don't remember the lake or the fresh air or the peaceful moments by the fire. I remember the quiet footsteps outside my tent, the boot prints that didn't belong, and the feeling that no matter how deep into the woods I went, I wasn't really alone. And I think about how easily someone could vanish out there without a sound, without a sign, and no one would know what happened to them. I was lucky. That thought never leaves me. I've done a lot of hiking alone over the years, mostly in places not too far from towns or well-known trail systems. But last summer, I decided to do something different. I took 2 weeks off from work, packed up my gear, and drove into a remote stretch of forestland in the northern part of the state. Somewhere I'd never been, somewhere not many people even talk about. I picked that spot on purpose. I wanted quiet, solitude. I wanted to test myself, and I definitely got all that, but not in the way I expected. The plan was to follow a rugged, unofficial trail loop I found online. A few people on a forum said they'd done it, but not many, and they warned it wasn't well marked. That was fine with me. I had my GPS, I had topographic maps, and I'd hiked worse before. The loop started at a small dirt pull-off off a logging road. There were no signs, no welcome kiosk, no other cars. Just me and the sound of the wind moving through the trees. The first few days went exactly how I hoped. I barely saw any sign of people. The trail was faint in places but still followable, especially with my GPS. It wound through thick pine woods, across clear streams, and up over ridgelines where I could see for miles. I kept a steady pace, set up camp before dark, and journaled everything each night. Felt good to be away from everything. I had no cell service out there, just my pack, the woods, and the sound of my own boots on dirt. It was on the 4th day that things started to go wrong. Not in any obvious way, nothing dramatic, just small things, the kind that are easy to shrug off at first. I was heading up a gradual slope through dense forest when I noticed the trail had vanished. I backtracked and tried to reorient myself with the GPS, but the signal was weak. Trees were thick above, and cloud cover had rolled in. My compass told me I was going the right direction, but my gut felt off. Still, I moved forward, thinking I'd pick the trail back up. An hour later, I realized I was bushwhacking through underbrush that hadn't seen human feet in a while. I stopped, pulled out the map, and tried to guess where I was. I wasn't panicking yet, but I wasn't thrilled either. I decided to keep going east and try to find a creek that the map said cut through that part of the forest. If I could find the water, I could follow it south and reconnect with the loop. Took a few hours, but I found the creek. By then, it was late afternoon. I was scratched up from brambles and sweating hard, but I figured I was back on track. I followed the water downstream, hoping to make camp somewhere along it. That night was the first time I didn't sleep well. Nothing really happened. I didn't hear anything, but I kept waking up every hour. Something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. I've slept in all kinds of places, even near bear dens once. But this was different. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing on me. I kept imagining things moving out there, shapes just beyond the trees. But every time I sat up and looked, I saw nothing. Still, I barely slept. The next morning, I felt groggy and slow. I got moving later than I wanted. The creek ran through a tight ravine for a while, and I had to climb up onto higher ground to keep going. That's when I noticed a strange smell. Not strong, just enough to be noticeable. It smelled like old, wet wood and something slightly rotten. I stopped and looked around but didn't see anything. I kept walking. Not long after, I saw something hanging in a tree up ahead. My heart jumped. It looked like fabric, maybe a tarp or a jacket. As I got closer, I realized it was an old backpack, moldy, torn in spots, hanging from a broken strap over a low branch. I looked around. No sign of a campsite nearby. The pack was full of water-damaged stuff. Half a sleeping bag, some rusted tools, a crushed metal pot. It had clearly been there for years. I checked for ID but found nothing. Just seeing it there, out in the middle of nowhere, made my stomach twist. I kept going, now more alert than before. That day, I didn't see any more trail markers, not even signs of old footpaths. I started to feel like I'd slipped off the edge of the map. I set up camp early that night, feeling uneasy. Again, I barely slept. The next day, I tried to use the GPS again. Still barely any signal. It would connect for a few seconds, then drop out. I felt like I was being pulled deeper into the forest rather than working my way out. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but I was lost. I had food for a few more days and I could boil creek water, but I had to find a way back. Around noon, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Not an animal, not wind. It was a crash, like something heavy falling through branches. Not far off. Then silence. I froze. I waited for birds to start up again, but they didn't. Total quiet. I crouched behind a tree and listened. Nothing. I slowly moved on, keeping low. That evening, I set up camp farther off the creek, near a boulder field. I figured I'd be harder to spot there. I ate quickly and got into my sleeping bag, but I couldn't relax. The silence outside was unnatural. Even the insects had stopped. Just dead, still air. Around midnight, I heard what sounded like footsteps. Slow, crunching dry leaves. I sat up and grabbed my knife. I held my breath and listened. They stopped. Then I heard a twig snap, farther away. I didn't move. Eventually, I heard nothing. I stayed awake the rest of the night. The next morning, I started walking without eating. I felt sick. Not from food, just from stress. My mouth was dry even though I was drinking plenty. My body felt heavy. I saw shadows in the trees and kept imagining someone behind me. I tried to stay calm, to focus on landmarks and direction. That's when I saw something that still makes my skin crawl. There were scratches on a tree trunk. Deep ones, fresh, like something had clawed it. But it wasn't an animal. The marks were too wide, too high up. They didn't make sense. I checked for tracks but found none. Just those deep, angry-looking gouges in the bark. I moved faster after that. I wanted out. I didn't care about the loop anymore. I just wanted to hit any road, any town. I headed southeast, hoping I'd run into something eventually. The days started to blur. I rationed food, slept little, heard more strange sounds. Snapping branches, distant thuds, low rustling. I never saw anyone, never saw animals, just shadows. Then, on what I think was the 9th day, I saw a structure. Just a glimpse through the trees. It was an old fire watchtower. Looked abandoned, with the wood faded and some railings missing. But it was the first man-made thing I'd seen in days. I rushed to it, climbed the rickety stairs, and saw a narrow dirt road far below. Relief hit me like a wave. I spent the night in the tower. No more footsteps, just wind. In the morning, I made my way down to the road and followed it for hours until I finally reached a small hunting cabin with an ATV out front. No one was there, but there was a map and a radio inside. I used the radio to call for help. Took hours, but someone came. A Forest Service guy. He looked shocked to see me. I was scratched up, dirty, probably looked half crazy. He asked where I'd come from. I showed him my route, or what I thought it was. He said no one hiked that area anymore. Said someone disappeared out there 5 years back. They never found him. I didn't tell him about the sounds or the feeling I had out there. I just asked for a ride back to town. I don't hike alone anymore, not in remote places. I stick to well-worn trails now with other people nearby. Whatever happened out there, whether it was just me breaking down or something else, I don't want to feel that way again. That deep, crushing sense of being watched, being followed. That feeling that the forest wasn't empty. I still dream about it sometimes. The silence, the scratches on the tree, the footsteps that stopped when I listened, and the backpack hanging like a warning I didn't understand until it was too late. I got out, barely, and I don't plan on ever going back. I've always liked hiking alone. It was something about the quiet, the sound of leaves brushing against each other, birds chirping in the distance, my boots pressing into the dirt one step at a time. It helped me breathe easier, made my thoughts feel organized. I'm not really a people person, so solo hiking felt like therapy. The idea of going out with others always seemed more stressful than peaceful. This happened in early fall 2022. I was 33 then. I'd taken time off from work and wanted to spend a few days hiking around the eastern edge of the Cascade Range in Washington state. I had picked this specific area because it was far from busy parks but still within reachable distance if something went wrong. My plan was to hike out to a ridge where I could camp a night or two and come back refreshed. Nothing extreme, just a long solo hike into the woods, a couple nights with a view, and back. I parked my truck in a small gravel lot just off a back road. There was no one else around when I got there. I did a final check on my gear. 60-liter pack, sleeping bag, pad, tent, plenty of food, 2 big water bottles, purifier, backup filter, flashlight, spare batteries, knife, pepper spray, med kit, GPS device, and printed topo maps inside a plastic sleeve. I locked the truck, pulled on my pack, and started up the trail. The air was crisp and dry. It hadn't rained for over a week, so the ground was firm, and the leaves crunched underfoot. I made good time through the first few miles of the forest. The trail curved upward slowly, winding through tall evergreens. I followed switchbacks up a small ridge, where I paused to eat a snack and drink water. The sun poked through the treetops, casting long shadows on the trail. That's when I saw it. A narrow trail I didn't recognize. It branched off from the main one, just past an old mossy log. It wasn't on any of my maps. I double-checked using my GPS and my printed topo sheets. There was no mention of any offshoot trail in this area. It looked used though, not wide but definitely walked on. Fresh boot prints. Not many, but enough to make me curious. At first, I told myself to stick to the original plan. But after a few more minutes of hiking, my curiosity got the better of me. I backtracked to the fork and took the side trail. Felt different almost immediately. The trees were closer together, and the light barely reached the trail. The ground was softer, covered in dry pine needles and patches of moss. I thought maybe it was a hunter's trail or an old forgotten path. I didn't think it was dangerous. I'd taken unmarked trails before. I was careful with my bearings. I always paid attention to where I was. At least I thought I did. After an hour or so, the path grew even more narrow. The trees were dense here. It got darker even though it was only mid-afternoon. I checked my GPS again and realized I was starting to move farther away from my original route than I had planned. But it wasn't too bad yet. I kept marking my location in my head, telling myself I could just turn around and follow my trail back if needed. Still, something about the area made me feel off. Not scared exactly, but uneasy. The woods were too quiet.
No birds, no bugs.
Just the sound of my footsteps and the faint wind overhead. Eventually, the trail opened up into a small clearing. There was an old fire ring made of blackened rocks, half buried in the dirt. Looked like someone had camped there years ago. It wasn't on any campsite map. I decided to stop for the night. I still had a couple hours of daylight, but I figured I'd rather set up here than keep going deeper into uncharted trail. I set up my tent, cooked a hot meal, and hung my food in a tree a good distance from the camp. I followed all the usual safety stuff. I even left some small markers, bright orange tags, near the trail entrance to help me find the way back the next day. I sat against a log and listened. Still no birds, just wind again. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up to faint noises, twigs snapping somewhere out in the woods. Every time I shined my flashlight out through the mesh, I saw nothing. I told myself it was probably a deer or maybe a raccoon. Still, I slept light and kept my knife close inside the tent. The next morning, I ate quickly and packed up. I wanted to head back toward the main trail. I didn't like how this side path felt. I followed my orange tags and walked back in the direction I came from, but something was wrong. After 30 minutes of walking, I should have hit the main trail again. But I didn't. I kept walking another 10 minutes. Still nothing. I pulled out the GPS and realized something that made my stomach drop. I wasn't where I thought I was. Somehow, the GPS wasn't showing the side trail at all anymore. My position didn't match what I remembered from the day before. I tried retracing my steps again, walking slower this time, checking for the footprints I made in the dirt. But they were gone, either blown away by wind or covered by fallen needles. The forest floor looked undisturbed. No broken twigs, no boot prints. I felt like I was walking in circles. By noon, I realized I was officially lost. I wasn't panicking yet. I had food, water, maps, and gear. I knew how to stay calm. I sat down, took a long drink, ate a protein bar, and reviewed my options. My instinct told me to keep moving east. The sun was still high, so I could track my direction by the shadows. I figured if I kept moving in one direction, I'd eventually hit a known trail or at least a river or road. I walked for hours. The forest grew thicker. I crossed small game trails, but nothing big. The underbrush scraped against my legs, and I started feeling that itch of being watched. I kept turning around, half expecting to see something or someone. But the trail behind me was always empty. The wind picked up, cold and sharp through the trees. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat, even though the air felt cold now. I started seeing things that didn't make sense. An old boot, half buried in mud. Rusted tin cans under a tree root. A rope swing hanging from a branch, frayed and covered in moss. No sign of people, just things left behind, like the woods had swallowed them. By late afternoon, I knew I wasn't getting out that day. I picked the flattest ground I could find and made camp again. I forced myself to eat even though I wasn't hungry. My head was spinning. I wasn't sure how I'd gotten so turned around. I kept thinking back to that first turn off the trail. That's where it all went wrong. That night was worse. I heard movement, not animals. Heavy, steady steps. At least 2 times during the night, I sat up with my flashlight and held my knife tight, staring out into the trees. But I never saw anything, just silence when I listened. I barely slept at all. The next morning, everything felt worse. I was tired, my legs ached, and my water was running low. I decided to climb a nearby ridge to see if I could get a better view and maybe spot a road or trail. It took over 2 hours to reach the top. The climb was steep and I slipped a few times. At one point, I scraped my knee bad on a rock. Blood ran down into my sock. But when I finally made it to the top, I felt a wave of relief. There it was, way in the distance. A long straight line cutting through the trees. A logging road. It had to be at least a few miles out, but now I had a direction. I marked the ridge on my GPS manually and began heading toward the road. I was too far out to go straight, so I zigzagged along ridges and low spots, trying to keep a steady pace. My knee throbbed, but I pushed through it. I knew I couldn't afford another night out there. The forest seemed different again. More dead trees, weird patterns in the bark, like something had scratched them. Old deep claw marks, not fresh, could have been a bear from months ago, but they were too high and too wide. I kept moving. Late that afternoon, I reached the edge of the woods and found an old broken fence. Beyond it was a clearing and the logging road. I nearly collapsed with relief. I followed the road for over an hour before I heard a distant engine. I ran toward the sound, waving my arms. A white pickup slowed to a stop. It was a local forest worker doing a routine check. When he saw my face, sweaty, bleeding, and exhausted, he didn't ask questions. He gave me water, let me sit in his truck, and drove me all the way back to where I'd parked. I'd been missing for over 48 hours. The man said that trail I mentioned by the mossy log shouldn't exist. There were no records of any forks in that area. Nothing was maintained beyond that ridge. He told me people have gotten turned around in those parts before. A few had gone missing for longer. Some were never found. They usually blamed old maps or GPS error. I didn't argue. I just nodded, thanked him, and drove home. It's been over 2 years now, and I haven't gone back to that area. I still hike, but I'm more careful. I stick to map trails, never follow unmarked paths, and I always let someone know exactly where I'm going. I don't know what happened in those woods exactly. I wasn't attacked. I didn't see anything I could explain, but I do know this: that trail wasn't on any map for a reason. I went hiking alone in late September of 2019. The plan was simple. I'd drive out to a trail about 4 hours from home, hike up into the high country, spend 3 nights out there, and come back. I had done solo trips before. This time I just wanted to get away from everything for a bit. No phones, no people, just me and the mountains. The area I picked wasn't a national park. It was a lesser-known wilderness area in Colorado, surrounded by rugged peaks and deep valleys. I had done research on it. There were a few trip reports from other hikers, but not much. Most people stuck to the bigger trails farther west. That made it perfect for me. I wanted solitude. The first day went smoothly. I parked my truck at the small dirt lot near the trailhead. There were no other cars. I signed in at the register and started walking. The trail was overgrown in spots, but not hard to follow. It climbed steadily for miles, crossing small streams and winding through pine forests. Around mid-afternoon, I found a small clearing off the trail and set up my tent. There was a little stream nearby and plenty of flat ground. It was quiet, too quiet maybe, but I liked that. That night, I sat near the stream and ate my freeze-dried meal. The sun went down fast behind the ridgeline. Temperatures dropped quickly. I crawled into my sleeping bag and listened to the wind in the trees. Nothing out of the ordinary. No animals, no strange sounds. Just wind. The second day was when things started to feel off. I woke up early, broke camp, and hiked deeper into the wilderness. The trail got narrower and less traveled. I stopped seeing boot prints. Sometimes I had to look hard to find the next section of trail. There were fallen trees, branches covering parts of the path, and the occasional washed-out section. But I kept going. The weather was good, sky clear, air cool. Around noon, I reached a large meadow. It was beautiful, golden grass swaying in the breeze, framed by distant peaks. But something didn't feel right. I couldn't explain it. I just felt uneasy standing there. I scanned the tree line, checked behind me. Nothing. Still, the feeling didn't go away. I moved quickly across the meadow and back into the trees. Later that day, I found another spot to camp. It was up on a ridge, overlooking a deep valley. I could see for miles. That should have made me feel safe, but instead it made me feel exposed. I set up the tent, gathered some water, and settled in. As night fell, I started to notice how quiet it was. Not just peaceful, silent. No insects, no birds, no wind. Just silence. I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up, certain I had heard something. A twig snapping, maybe, or leaves crunching. But every time I sat up and listened, there was nothing. I told myself it was just animals. Probably deer, maybe a bear. but I never saw anything, just that same heavy silence. By the third day, I was tired, not just physically, but mentally. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling of being watched was getting stronger. I packed up quickly and decided to cut across a different trail to make a loop back toward the trailhead. According to my map, this alternate trail would be less steep but longer. I figured I'd cover half the distance that day, then hike out fully the next. A few hours into that day's hike, I noticed something strange. There were no signs of the trail anymore. No markers, no cairns, nothing. The path I had been following just slowly faded into the woods. I backtracked, tried to find where I went wrong, but I couldn't. Everything looked the same: pines, rocks, slopes. I wasn't panicking yet, but I could feel my chest tightening. I pulled out my compass and map and tried to figure out where I was. Best guess, I had veered west of the trail. I changed course and started heading southeast, hoping to intersect it again. Hours passed. The sun was getting lower. My legs were sore. My shoulders ached from the pack. I stopped to drink some water and eat a bar. That's when I saw it. There was a tree stump nearby, old and rotted. On the side of it, someone had carved something. A name maybe, or initials, but it wasn't old. The cuts were clean, fresh. Not more than a few days, maybe even hours. That should have made me feel better. Someone else had been here recently, but it didn't. It made the unease worse. Why would someone carve into a random stump deep off trail in the middle of nowhere? I kept going. My pace quickened. I just wanted to find the trail again. The forest started to thicken. The ground sloped downward into a ravine. I didn't want to go down, but the terrain forced me. At the bottom, I found a small creek. I followed it, thinking it might lead to a larger body of water and maybe a trail. That's when I noticed another odd thing. A pile of stones stacked neatly beside the creek. Not a cairn, just a small pile. Too deliberate to be natural, too random to be helpful. I didn't touch it. The light was almost gone. I needed to camp. I found a semi-flat area a few dozen yards from the creek, pitched my tent, and sat there in the fading light, listening. Still that strange silence, the kind that presses on your ears. I ate without appetite and crawled into my tent. I didn't sleep. I lay there, listening, my heart pounding for no reason. Sometime after midnight, I heard something. Footsteps. Not an animal. Two-legged. Slow. Measured. Crunching leaves one step at a time. They came from the trees, moved near the tent, then stopped. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just listened. No flashlight. No sound. Then, after what felt like an hour, the steps moved away. Back into the woods. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The first light, I packed as fast as I could. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just walked. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just wanted out. I kept heading downhill, figuring I'd hit a road or the main trail eventually. Mid-morning, I found a fence.
A barbed wire fence.
It wasn't on my map. It ran east-west across a small clearing. On the other side was more forest. I followed the fence west, hoping to find a break or a gate. Eventually, I found a dirt road. Not a hiking trail, a proper road probably used by hunters or forest rangers. It wasn't marked, but it was wide enough for vehicles. I followed it for miles. Hours passed. Finally, I saw tire tracks, then a rusted sign, bent and half covered by branches. I recognized the name, an old forest access road that led back toward the highway. Relief washed over me. I was still far from my truck, but I wasn't lost anymore. That evening, dirty, exhausted, and sunburned, I reached the trailhead. My truck was still there. No other vehicles in the lot. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat there for a while. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stared at the trees, that heavy feeling of being watched still clinging to me. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not for a long time. When I did, I kept it simple. Got turned around, found my way back. I left out the footsteps, the silence, the carvings, the stacked stones. I still don't know what I stumbled into out there. Maybe nothing. Maybe just my mind playing tricks on me. But I haven't been hiking alone since. That trip changed something in me. I still love the outdoors. But now, whenever I'm out there, even with others, I keep looking over my shoulder, listening, waiting, because some part of me still feels like I was never really alone in those woods. And maybe, just maybe, whatever was out there knows that I made it out, but barely. I decided to go on a solo hiking trip deep into the mountains of northern Montana. I'd been working nonstop for months, and I needed to get away from people, phones, screens, and just be with nature. I chose a trail that wasn't too well known. It was a bit remote, didn't have much foot traffic, and had a long loop that went deep into the woods before circling back to the start. The whole loop was around 30 miles, and I planned to do it over 3 days. I had my gear, my pack, my food, and my water filter. Everything was ready. I arrived at the small parking area near the trailhead early in the morning. There was only one other car parked, and it looked like it had been there a few days. That made me feel even better about the trip. I signed the trail register, strapped on my pack, and started walking. The trail was narrow and overgrown in some places, but it was quiet and peaceful. I could hear birds calling, wind moving through the trees, and the soft crunch of my boots on dirt. The first day was uneventful. I hiked around 10 miles, stopping to rest every couple of hours. The trail climbed slowly upward, winding through thick pine forests and across small creeks. I didn't see another person all day. Around 5 p.m., I found a flat area near a small stream and set up my tent. I boiled some water, made dinner, and just sat on a rock while the sun dipped behind the trees. It was exactly what I needed. That night, I slept well. It was quiet, dark, and cool. In the middle of the night, I woke up once to pee, and when I stepped outside, I saw more stars than I'd seen in a long time. Everything was calm. I crawled back into the tent and slept until sunrise. Day 2 started early. I ate breakfast, packed up, and continued deeper into the forest. The trail started getting a little harder to follow. There were sections where trees had fallen, or the path was faint. I used a compass and my paper map to keep myself going in the right direction. I always double-checked when I came to a fork or anything confusing. I didn't want to get lost. Still, I felt good. The solitude, the nature, it all made me feel alive. Around midday, I noticed some fresh tracks on the trail. At first, I thought they were from a deer or elk, but the pattern was odd. It looked more like human boot prints, but the gait was strange, like the person had a limp or was dragging one foot slightly. They were headed in the same direction I was going. That didn't bother me too much. Maybe someone was ahead of me on the trail. Still, I didn't remember seeing any recent signatures in the register except mine and the one from the older vehicle. I kept hiking. The air felt thicker, the woods a little darker. It might have just been my imagination, or maybe it was the altitude. My legs were tired, but I wanted to get close to the halfway point. Late that afternoon, I saw something that stopped me. There was a piece of torn fabric hanging from a low branch. It looked like part of a jacket sleeve. Faded green, dirty. It had been there a while, but not too long. Beneath it, the earth looked disturbed, like someone had slipped or fallen. I checked around, saw no one, and decided not to waste time. I moved on. That night, I camped near a ridge. The ground sloped a little, but I made it work. I had a weird feeling in my stomach I couldn't explain. Not fear exactly, but unease. I didn't feel alone anymore, even though I hadn't seen another person. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. It's common, especially on solo trips. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept hearing faint sounds outside my tent. Small sticks snapping, the wind rustling. Once, it sounded like someone stepped on a dry patch of leaves. I held my breath and listened, but everything went quiet again. I told myself it was probably a deer or a raccoon. I stayed awake a long time before drifting off. When I woke up the next morning, I noticed something that really freaked me out. There were scuff marks near the entrance of my tent. Not animal prints, scuff marks, like boots dragging in the dirt. They led up to my tent and then away from it, disappearing into the woods. My heart was pounding. I packed my stuff quickly and got back on the trail. I tried to convince myself again it was nothing. Maybe the marks were old. Maybe I just hadn't noticed them when I set up. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. They weren't there the night before. Someone had come near my tent while I slept. The third day was rough. I couldn't focus. Every sound made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder. I moved faster than I normally would. My pack felt heavier. The trail curved and twisted and sometimes faded into brush. I kept checking the map and compass, trying to make sure I was on track. Around noon, I saw something up ahead. At first, I thought it was just a fallen tree, but as I got closer, I realized it was a makeshift shelter. Someone had built a lean-to against a big boulder using branches and a torn tarp. It didn't look abandoned. There was a pile of bones nearby, small animal bones mostly. A few larger ones too. I couldn't tell what they were from. There were also old cans and wrappers scattered around. I didn't go too close. I felt watched. I felt like if I stayed too long, someone would come out of the woods. I backed away and returned to the trail, walking fast. I didn't stop again except to drink water. My goal now was to get to the end of the loop by nightfall, even if it meant hiking in the dark. The trail was harder to follow the closer I got to the end. It looked like it hadn't been maintained in a long time. I slipped twice trying to cross a narrow ridge. My ankle twisted once, but I kept going. The trees felt closer together, like they were pressing in. The wind had picked up, and I kept thinking I heard someone behind me. I didn't turn around anymore. I just walked. When the sun started going down, I was still about 5 miles from the trailhead. My legs were burning, but I couldn't stop. I put on my headlamp and kept moving. I kept imagining someone following just out of the beam of light. I kept imagining hearing breathing that wasn't mine. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw the old trail marker near the start. I almost cried. My car was still there, untouched. I threw my pack in the back seat and got in. I locked the doors, started the engine, and drove. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest small town, about 30 miles away. I got a motel room and took the longest, hottest shower of my life. I sat on the bed after, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of what happened. I kept going over everything, the boot prints, the torn fabric, the shelter, the scuff marks. None of it made total sense. The only thing I know for sure is that someone else was out there. They never showed themselves, never said a word, but they watched me, followed me. Maybe they wanted to scare me. Maybe they were just trying to survive. Or maybe they were waiting for me to make a mistake. I never went back to that trail. I didn't report it because I couldn't prove anything. But I'll never forget how it felt. The fear, the constant watching, the feeling that no matter how alone I thought I was, someone was always there, hidden, quiet, waiting. I had no reason to rush that morning. It was early May, cool but not cold, and I had taken a week off from work to clear my head. I wasn't going through anything dramatic, just the usual. Work stress, too many screens, too little quiet. I wanted real silence, the kind you don't get in the city even at night. I wanted wind and trees and time alone. So I picked a spot on the map, somewhere far enough into the backcountry to feel cut off, but not so remote that it was reckless. The plan was simple. Hike into the mountains, set up camp near a lake, stay 2 nights, then hike back. I had done similar trips before, but never fully alone. Not because I was scared, at least I didn't think I was, but just because it hadn't come up. Friends always joined, but this time no one was free. I figured I'd be fine. I packed right, I trained for it, and I kept the plan simple. I parked my car at a small trailhead just off a dirt road. No other cars were there. That should have told me something, but it didn't. I was excited. The air was fresh, crisp, and clean. I tightened my laces, adjusted my backpack, locked the car, and stepped into the trees. The trail started easy, a slow climb through dense pine and fir trees. The higher I went, the fewer signs of people I saw. No footprints, no wrappers, no broken branches. After about an hour, I stopped to drink some water. The silence was thick. Even the birds seemed distant. I liked it. It made the world feel bigger somehow. I hiked another few hours, following the path deeper into the hills, past boulders and dry creek beds, then finally through a high saddle that opened up into a wide valley. That's where I saw the lake. It sat still and perfect, like a sheet of dark glass surrounded by low ridges. No cabins, no smoke, no signs of human life. I walked around to the far side, found a flat patch of grass, and set up my tent. I took my time getting camp ready, boiled some water for a freeze-dried meal, made sure the tent stakes were solid, filtered more water, hung the food bag from a tree. Everything felt good, felt right. That night, after eating and sitting near the lake as the sky dimmed, I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipped the tent closed, and listened to the wind outside. I drifted off feeling calm. The first sign something was wrong came early the next morning. I woke up to the sound of sticks cracking. Not little ones, not like a squirrel or bird. Big, slow breaks, heavy. I didn't move, just lay still and listened. One break, then silence. Then another, closer. I checked my watch, 5:17 a.m. Still gray outside, no real light yet. My breath caught in my throat. I thought maybe it was a bear, so I stayed quiet. I knew the worst thing I could do was panic. Eventually, the noise faded. I waited a long time before unzipping the tent. Nothing. No movement. No tracks I could see. I walked around, checked the food bag. Still there. Everything looked normal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. Something had been there, and it wasn't the wind. I packed a small day bag and hiked up one of the ridges to get a view of the surrounding area. Maybe I could spot a trail or a clearer way out for when I hiked back. The climb was steep, and I had to grab rocks and roots in places, but the view was worth it. From the top, I could see miles of forest, all shades of green and gray and blue. No signs of people anywhere, not even smoke. That's when I realized how far out I really was. That afternoon, back at camp, I tried to relax, but I kept glancing over my shoulder, listening for sounds. At one point, I thought I saw movement across the lake, just in the trees. Not a person, just a shift, like someone stepping behind a tree. But when I looked harder, there was nothing. That night, I barely slept. Around midnight, I heard something again. This time, not sticks. It was metal, like the soft click of something tapping. It sounded like it was coming from near the food bag. I grabbed my flashlight, slowly unzipped the tent, and scanned the area. Again, nothing. The food bag still hung untouched. I stayed up, sitting in the tent with my headlamp off, just listening. I finally fell asleep sometime after 3 a.m., sitting upright. The next morning, I decided I wasn't going to stay the second night. I felt stupid. Maybe it was just wildlife, maybe it was just my brain being twitchy from isolation. Either way, I decided I'd pack up and hike back out. Better to leave early than let my mind spiral. I had just finished packing when I noticed something off. There were boot prints near my tent. They weren't mine. I checked. I'd worn the same boots the whole trip, and these prints were larger, wider, and deeper. They came from the trees and stopped about 10 feet from my tent. Then they turned around. That was all I needed. I threw my pack on and started hiking. The trail was mostly downhill heading back, but the wind had picked up and I kept feeling watched. I moved fast, too fast, and slipped a few times on loose gravel. My knee banged against a rock at one point, hard enough to make me stop and swear under my breath. But I didn't stop long. I just kept moving. Couple miles in, I heard something behind me. Not close, but following. I'd stop and it would stop. I'd walk, and after a few seconds, I'd hear it again. A soft, slow rustling. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to confirm it. I just walked faster. At one point, I ducked behind a boulder and waited. The sound got closer. It stopped just beyond the rock. I held my breath. Then silence. I waited 10 minutes before moving again. When I stood and stepped back onto the trail, I looked behind me. There was no one there. I made it another mile, my nerves completely shot. Then I saw it. A fresh boot print. Same size as the ones near my tent. Right in the middle of the trail. It wasn't there when I'd come through 2 days earlier. I knew that for a fact. I picked up the pace, heart racing. I didn't care if I fell or twisted something. I just needed to get back to the car. Another mile. I started hearing birds again. The trail started to look familiar. Then I smelled smoke, not a campfire, cigarette smoke. It was faint, but sharp in the clean mountain air. I stopped, listened, nothing. Then I noticed something hanging from a low branch to my left, just off the trail. It was a strip of blue fabric. Looked like a piece of torn clothing. I didn't get closer. I didn't want to know. I just moved. Half a mile from the car, I heard a whistle. Not a bird, a human whistle. 2 notes, high then low. I froze. My stomach turned. Came again. The same 2 notes. I didn't respond. I didn't turn around. I ran. I ran until I saw the parking lot. My car was still there, still locked, but there was something on the hood. A single pine cone balanced upright, dead center. I didn't touch it. I unlocked the door, threw my pack in, started the engine, and drove without stopping. I didn't look back. That drive was a blur. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, I half expected to see headlights or worse, someone in the back seat. When I finally reached the highway, I pulled into a gas station and sat there for 20 minutes, shaking. Then I drove straight home. I didn't tell anyone for days. I didn't want to sound paranoid. I didn't know what to say. Someone followed me? There were boot prints? I heard a whistle? Sounded thin, but I knew what I felt. I knew what I saw. A few weeks later, I looked up that trail online. Forums, trip reports, old posts. I found a thread about someone who had gone missing on that same trail years earlier. Never found. Just disappeared. Their car had been left at the same trailhead. That was enough for me. I haven't hiked alone since. I still go out, but always with someone else. Always where I know there'll be people. I still love nature, still love the quiet. But I keep one ear open now. I don't assume silence means safety, because somewhere out there on that trail someone was watching me, and they didn't want to be seen. Started as a way to clear my head. That's how a lot of things start, I guess. Just me wanting a quiet weekend away from the traffic, the work emails, the constant vibration of my phone in my pocket. I had taken a few solo hikes before, nothing too long or wild. Just in and out trips on marked trails, maybe a night or 2 at designated camping spots. I wasn't an expert, but I was careful. I packed well, I didn't push my limits, and I always let someone know where I was going. This time, though, I decided I wanted more isolation. I wanted to really get away. I picked a state forest a few hours' drive north of where I lived. It wasn't one of the popular ones. Less infrastructure, fewer campers, and more rugged terrain. It was late September. The weather was starting to cool down, which I liked. I checked the forecasts, made sure the path I picked was safe and not too overgrown, and packed for 3 days. I brought extra food, layers, a backup GPS, water filters, and a tarp in case I needed to rig something quick. Everything seemed lined up. I parked my car at a small gravel pull-off just outside the forest's edge. There wasn't another vehicle in sight. The air was cool and smelled like damp leaves and pine. It was quiet, no birds even. I chalked it up to the season and time of day. I shouldered my pack and started moving. The trail I followed wasn't official. I found it through an old hiking forum where some guy mentioned it led through deep forest and up into some remote hills with great views. There weren't any warning signs, and I had downloaded offline maps of the area just in case. The first day went fine. I hiked for about 6 hours through a thick mix of pine and birch, keeping a steady pace. I saw a couple deer, one old broken-down tree stand, and a small rusted sign nailed to a tree with nothing legible left on it. By late afternoon, I found a clearing near a slope and set up camp. I boiled water, ate one of those freeze-dried meals, and just sat there listening to the wind pushing through the trees. No cell signal, which was expected. I checked my GPS. Everything was tracking fine. I made a small fire, not for cooking, just for the warmth and comfort. As it got dark, the forest felt heavier. The wind never fully stopped, kept shifting directions, like something was weaving through the trees. I fell asleep around 9 p.m. in my tent, tucked in my sleeping bag, knife clipped to the inside of the tent just in case. I didn't hear anything during the night. just wind and the occasional crack of a branch from above. The next morning, I packed up and pushed deeper. I had planned to do a loop, follow the old trail west, then turn north, then curve back southeast to the car over 3 days. But after about 3 hours of hiking that second morning, clouds rolled in faster than I expected. They were thick, gray, and moving low. It felt like the forest got even quieter under them. Then the rain started. It wasn't a light drizzle. It was cold, heavy, and wind-driven. Within minutes, I was soaked. I pulled on my rain shell, covered my pack, and kept going. But the trail was starting to vanish. The dirt turned to mud fast. My boots sank deep with every step. I pulled out the map and GPS. I was still heading in the right direction, but slower. I decided I'd need to find a place to stop early and shelter until the worst of it passed. I didn't want to set up my tent in that rain. It would have gotten soaked before I could even finish staking it. I figured I'd walk for another hour, and if nothing better came up, I'd use the tarp to make a shelter. About 45 minutes later, I noticed something through the trees. It looked like straight lines, not natural shapes. As I got closer, I realized it was a cabin. It didn't show up on the map or GPS. No roads led to it. It was just there. The structure was rough, old, weathered wood. A short porch, one door, a couple windows, both fogged and streaked with grime. I approached carefully. It didn't look like anyone had been there in a long time. No tire tracks, no boot prints, no path. Just moss and leaf-covered ground. I knocked on the door out of habit, even though I was sure no one was inside. No response. I turned the handle, it was unlocked. Inside, it smelled like old wood and mildew. It was dark, but not pitch black. The windows let in enough gray light to see around. There was a wood stove in one corner, a narrow bed frame with a moldy mattress, and a couple shelves on the wall. No sign of animals, no garbage, just dusty, forgotten furniture and a silence that felt too still. I shut the door behind me and stood there, listening. The rain slammed against the roof like waves hitting a boat. I dropped my pack on the floor and pulled off my wet jacket. I wasn't planning on staying long, just until the rain calmed enough to move on. I started looking around. There was a drawer built into the wall beneath one of the shelves. I pulled it open slowly. Inside was an old hunting knife, a small box of damp matches, and a rolled-up paper map. The map was yellowed and torn at the edges, but it was of the forest. Hand-drawn, trails marked in red ink, some of them crossed out. The cabin was marked too. Tiny lettering beside it said, Old Hunter's Outpost. I looked at the other markings. Some of them looked like notes, X's with dates, arrows pointing toward water sources. One section near the top had a big black circle drawn over it with the word, Don't, written beside it in all caps. I stared at that for a while before folding it back up and placing it on the table. I figured whoever lived or hunted here just didn't want others going in that direction. Maybe cliffs, bears, something dangerous. But something about how that word was written. Just don't. It bothered me more than it should have. I passed the time drying out some of my gear and boiling water from my canteen. I used my stove to make another meal and ate it slowly while sitting on the floor, back against the wall. The longer I stayed, the less I liked being in there. It wasn't just the musty smell or the way the cabin creaked. It was something else, like the silence had weight to it. Every sound I made, unzipping a pouch, stirring food, sounded too loud, like I was disturbing something. The rain didn't let up, poured for hours. By late afternoon, I decided I might need to sleep there. The ground outside had turned to swamp. My boots were still soaked, my gear too damp to set up properly. I didn't want to risk getting sick. I laid out my sleeping bag in the driest corner I could find, near the stove. There was still a stack of chopped wood by the door. I used a few logs to light a small fire in the stove with the matches. It warmed the place quickly, and the sound of burning would help to push the silence back. Still, I couldn't relax. I kept thinking about the map, that word, and how weird it was that a whole cabin wasn't marked on anything digital. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint noises, branches tapping the glass, the wind sliding under the door, maybe even footsteps in the distance. I knew I was just psyching myself out, but it felt real. At one point in the night, I woke up to the sound of something shifting outside. Not animals, not wind. It was heavy, slow, like something dragging. I sat up, heart pounding, and reached for my knife. I stayed like that for a long time, just listening. Nothing followed. The dragging sound didn't come back. Eventually, I laid back down, eyes open in the dark. In the morning, the rain had finally stopped. Everything outside was dripping, quiet again. I packed up fast. I wanted to get away from that place. I stepped outside, took a deep breath, and started moving northeast, away from the cabin, back toward my original route. I walked for hours that day, moving fast. The mud slowed me down, but I kept going. At one point, I checked the paper map again, just out of curiosity. I was skirting near that circled area. I debated cutting a longer route to avoid it, but that would have added hours. I figured it was just a warning for cliffs or rough terrain. I went straight. Around late afternoon, I noticed the woods getting denser, not just thick, but twisted. Fallen trees that looked like they'd been pushed over, not just rotted. The ground was uneven, more rock than soil. I checked my GPS. It had gone blank. Not off blank, like it couldn't get a signal even though I was still under open sky. I tried not to panic. I had my compass. I still had the paper map. I knew I had to go east. I kept pushing through, breaking branches out of my way, slipping on the wet rocks. Then I found something I didn't expect. A boot. It was old, half buried in leaves. Still tied, still upright. It didn't look like it had been there long. I looked around, then spotted another one about 10 feet away. Then a tattered piece of fabric, like part of a shirt. Everything in me said turn around, but I had no idea which way was safe anymore. That evening, I climbed a small ridge to get a better view. From the top, I saw another structure in the distance. Another cabin, but not the same one. This one looked collapsed. I thought maybe if I could reach it, I could get my bearings. Took another 2 hours to get there. The cabin was I didn't plan for things to go wrong. No one ever does. I had taken solo hikes plenty of times before. I liked the silence, the calm, the way my thoughts stretched out in the quiet. There was something about being far from phone signals, far from cars and people and noise, that made me feel alive. This hike was supposed to be 3 days in the Plumas National Forest, early September. The forecast said dry but manageable. Fire danger was elevated like it usually was around that time of year, but no active fires were reported in the region. I'd done most of my packing the night before. My backpack was loaded with a water filter, freeze-dried meals, a small stove, first aid kit, sleeping bag, ultralight tent, and a bunch of other gear I'd accumulated over the years. I'd learned to go light but not stupid. I had a detailed topographic map, a Garmin GPS, and an emergency beacon. I'd even registered my hike with the park's online portal in case anything went wrong. I wasn't reckless. The plan was to park near a remote trailhead called Grizzly Ridge, hike into the more isolated northern stretch of the forest, and loop around through some steep elevation and river crossings. No cell service, no other humans, just me, a trail, and 3 quiet days. I started at around 9:30 in the morning. The sky was cloudless and pale blue. Dry air hung around me, but there was a crispness in the shadows. The forest was mostly pine and oak up in this part, with scattered meadows and the occasional patch of brush. The first part of the hike was easy, mostly downhill, winding through a narrow ravine that eventually opened into a thick forested area. The trail markers were spaced well apart, but I kept my GPS on for safety. After 6 hours, I made camp beside a shallow creek. I filtered some water, boiled it for dinner, and watched the sun set behind the slope. Everything was quiet. I didn't see a single soul that day, just a few deer and a rabbit. I slept easily that night. The sounds of bugs and the gurgling creek covered everything else. The wind was still. I remember how still it was. The next morning, I woke up just before dawn and packed up camp. I had about 12 miles of rough trail ahead, climbing into higher elevation before looping around. The terrain would get rockier and the trees more sparse. I'd reach a small ridgeline, drop back into forest, then follow a longer winding path down to the next creek. That's where I planned to make my second camp. By noon, I started noticing how dry everything felt. Pine needles cracked underfoot. The wind had picked up slightly, but it wasn't strong. Just a steady movement through the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that the air felt off. Not hot, just dry. Drier than I remembered. Then, sometime around 2 p.m., I smelled it. Smoke. It was faint, and at first I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I'd walked through some old fire-scorched trees or charred ground. But this was different. It smelled fresh, sharp, not like an old fire, like a new one. I stopped and looked around. The trees were calm. There was no haze in the air. I climbed up a small slope to get a better view. The landscape spread out below me for miles, valleys, trees, ridges. And off in the far west, past the next ridge, I saw it. A thin, dirty column of smoke rising straight into the sky. My stomach sank. I knew what that meant. Somewhere out there, something was burning. My first instinct was to stay calm. Fires happened in the forest. Most were far away and didn't spread fast. But that column was close enough to see clearly. Maybe 10 miles, maybe less. And I didn't know which direction the wind was moving. If it was blowing toward me, even a slow fire could become a big problem quickly. I pulled out my GPS and map, then cross-referenced my location with the smoke's direction. The fire seemed to be west of me, beyond the loop I was planning to hike. That meant if I moved east and slightly north, I'd be heading away from it. I decided not to take the full loop and instead cut my hike short, moving toward a nearby trail that would take me out near an old service road. It wasn't a panicked decision, just a smart one. Fires could shift. I didn't want to be anywhere near it if things turned. I hiked hard that afternoon, covering more miles than I'd planned. My legs ached and my back started to cramp. I stopped just before dusk at a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. From there, I saw something that made my stomach twist. The smoke wasn't a single thin column anymore. It had widened. It rolled and twisted across the horizon in a dark wall, stretching sideways like a living thing. The base of it glowed faintly orange. The fire was growing and fast. Worse, the wind had changed direction. I could see it in the way the smoke leaned now. It was no longer moving westward, it was drifting northeast, right toward me. I set up my tent in a shallow hollow that night, not far from a stream. I kept the fly off so I could see the stars, but I barely slept. Around midnight, I saw a faint red glow on the western horizon. It flickered, not constant like the sun or moon. A pulsing orange tint against the sky. I could feel the heat in the air by then. Not hot like a summer day, hot like an oven you've left on. Subtle but heavy. I didn't make a fire or cook. I just drank water, ate cold protein bars, and waited for dawn. At first light, I packed up everything and started hiking east, fast. I wasn't on the main trail anymore. I'd cut through some less marked terrain and was relying mostly on the map and GPS. The service road I wanted to reach was still about 12 miles away. My plan was to hike out completely by nightfall, but the smoke beat me there. By noon, it had reached the upper edge of the valley. The sun disappeared behind a thick, choking haze. The temperature jumped, not a little, by at least 10 degrees. I was sweating even in the shade. The air was thicker. I coughed once, then again. It wasn't unbearable, but it felt wrong. My shirt clung to me, and my mouth was dry no matter how much I drank. I started to hear it then. A deep, distant roar, like wind, but more uneven. Sometimes steady, sometimes rising sharply like a train in the distance. That sound haunted me for hours. It meant the fire was close, closer than I thought. Around 3 p.m., I reached a narrow ravine and tried to cross, hoping to reach a higher ridge. That's when I saw the first flame. It flickered through the trees about 400 yards upslope, licking the dry pine needles and brush. It was small, no taller than a man, but it was moving fast, carried by the slope and the wind. I froze. I had never seen wildfire this close. Photos don't do it justice. It isn't just fire. It's heat, noise, motion. The trees popped like fireworks as sap inside them boiled and exploded. The flames didn't crawl, they leapt. I turned and ran. I dropped down the ravine and started moving parallel to the fire's path, hoping to outpace it. My pack slammed against my back with every step, but I didn't dare stop. My lungs started to burn. I coughed hard, then kept running. Every so often I looked behind me. Smoke filled the trees like fog. I couldn't see the flames anymore, but I knew they were close. I hiked, no, sprinted for the next hour. My legs were jelly by the end of it. I reached a small clearing and collapsed under a rock outcropping, trying to breathe. I was soaked in sweat. My hands shook. I dug through my pack and found the emergency blanket and wrapped it around me like a shield. Not for cold, but to help deflect radiant heat. Then I heard a new sound. A helicopter. It was faint at first, then louder. I scrambled out into the open and waved my arms, trying to be seen. But the chopper didn't come close. It passed over the ridge, low and fast, then vanished again into the smoke. I realized then that they weren't searching, they were dropping water, trying to hold the fire line. No one knew I was here. I kept moving after that, slower now. I stuck close to the edge of a creek, thinking it might act as a natural firebreak. The terrain got rougher, steep walls, fallen trees, jagged rocks. I scraped my hands climbing, nearly lost my footing twice. The smoke thickened, and my eyes watered constantly. I wrapped a bandana over my nose and kept my head low. That night, I didn't set up a tent. I found a narrow, flat spot under a rock ledge and crawled in with my sleeping bag. I could still hear the fire, though it was distant again. The roar faded in and out like ocean waves. I didn't sleep. I just waited. At dawn, I started again. The service road was near. I could feel it. I moved up and out of the creek, climbing toward the eastern ridge. Then the wind shifted again. In less than 20 minutes, the smoke thickened to the point that I couldn't see more than 30 feet. Ash rained down like snow. The sun disappeared behind the gray. The sky turned an eerie orange-gray color, like twilight. The air smelled like chemicals and burning wood. I tried to stay calm, to keep walking east. I checked my GPS. I was less than 2 miles from the road, but I had